Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a really structured message, actually. It's called the ABC of Praying to Receive. And it's not just, a few tips. It feels like a very complete framework, designed, it seems, to unlock access to, well, things like healing, salvation, deliverance.
That's right. And our goal here, our mission, is really to get to the heart of that theological mechanism. The source material uses this image, a key not placed in your hands, but in your heart. So we want to understand that foundation, that confidence it talks about, moving from maybe asking hesitantly to receiving, well, abundantly.
And the structure is super clear, which helps. A, B, C. Ask, believe, confess.
That's a simple framework.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's unpack this then, starting with A.
Ask.
The focus here is ask for all things for his glory. It draws a lot from John 15, verses 7 and 16 specifically. And the promise, honestly, it sounds almost too big. You shall ask what you will, and it shall be done unto you. But the whole thing seems to hinge on that condition, right? Abiding.
That's the key word, isn't it? Abiding. According to this framework, let's say the real currency for asking isn't how desperate you are. It's about that consistent relationship. That's what the source means by abiding, sort of operating within God's declared will and his nature. And if you're doing that,
then the scope is huge.
Exactly. Massive. Salvation, healing, deliverance, whatever it is, the purpose has to point back to him. It's got to be for his glory.
Right.
Which lines up with, Matthew 7, ask, seek, knock. There's this expectation of action, of confidence you're meant to actually expect to receive.
And this brings up that contrast the source makes between the Old Covenant and now. It mentions figures like Lot or Saul, saying they didn't have the same confidence. They couldn't just walk up and ask. Was it about mediation or?
That seems to be precisely the point. In the Old Covenant, access was, heavily restricted. You had the law, sacrifices, specific mediators. It created this sense of maybe distance, limitation, even fear.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But the claim here is that the new covenant, through Jesus, changed everything radically. It's described as a special season of grace where those limits are gone.
So everyone has access.
Everyone. That's the promise. The confidence to ask directly and, importantly, receive in abundance. Like the Father's just waiting to fill whatever you bring.
Okay, this idea of limitless resources. It leads to a pretty huge claim the source makes about Jesus giving his name as a signature of authority.
John 14, yeah.
Comparing it to a signed checkbook, which is a powerful image.
Yeah.
But then it extends this to, limitless new organs. God providing a new heart, new lungs. How does the source square that with the reality, that people pray faithfully and still suffer physically? That needs some context.
It does. And the way it's addressed is by sort of reframing how we think about God's power. The argument goes, if God created the entire universe, instantly, effortlessly, then rebuilding an organ biologically, that's certainly within his capacity. The issue, therefore, isn't God's supply running out.
It's our access.
It's the believer's access through that signature of authority. Jesus' name used with faith, and directed again toward his glory. It connects the physical need right back to that limitless divine resource. The idea is not to limit God based on what we see.
And there's that story used to illustrate this. The paralyzed man, lowered through the roof.
Yes, that's a perfect example of receiving much more than you asked for. The man came looking for physical healing, right? But Jesus deals with the spiritual need first, forgives his sins, grants salvation. Then he heals him physically, so he got both. It sets the stage for that new covenant idea of abundance.
Okay, so that kind of wraps up A. Ask. With this idea of, boundless confidence, if you're abiding.
Pretty much.
So now let's get into B, believe. Believe at all times in his grace. Now, this often feels like the sticking point for people, doesn't it? How do you keep believing when your heart feels weak or when what you see around you seems to contradict the abundance you just asked for?
Yeah, that's a real hurdle. The message tackles that psychological aspect by grounding faith in testimony. Think about how we trust things we haven't seen.
Okay.
Like you trust your geography teacher about Africa, maybe, even if you've never been. You trust the teacher who trusts the map maker, who trusts the explorer,
Right, there's a chain of trust.
Exactly. And here, we're called to believe Jesus' assurance about heaven, healing, salvation, because he is the ultimate authority. He came from heaven. He promised these things. He returned. It's about trusting the witness.
Got it. And this belief is immediately tied to grace. Ephesians 2.8 is central here. Salvation is by grace through faith, and it's explicitly a gift, not of yourselves. For someone maybe wrestling with the terms, can we simplify why good works can't save you, according to this?
Absolutely. Imagine a legal ledger. Sin is like this huge debt that everyone racks up, universal debt.
Okay.
Now, no matter how many good deeds you pile up on the credit side, charity work, kindness, whatever, the original debt on the other side is just too massive, your good works can't actually pay it off.
They don't cancel the debt.
Exactly. And since only a perfect, sinless life and sacrifice Jesus' atonement could pay it, salvation has to be a gift. If you could earn it or pay for it yourself, well, the source says that would lead to boasting, which is ruled out.
That makes the gift aspect really clear. And it's all rooted in God's love, John 3.1 sees. But let's talk about that paradox of riches from 2 Corinthians 8.9. Christ was rich, became poor. So believers might become spiritually rich through his poverty. How does knowing Christ became poor actually help me when my heart feels weak and I'm struggling to believe?
That paradox is presented as the powerhouse of grace. Christ's poverty wasn't just financial, it was total. He took on human weakness, suffering, death. He experienced lack in every sense.
Okay.
So because he willingly went through that poverty, every spiritual lack you feel, that weak heart, not enough strength, wavering faith, it's covered by what he already did, his finished work.
So my spiritual wealth isn't based on how strong I feel today.
Precisely. It's guaranteed, completely separate from your performance or feelings. This grace, it ensures you have enough sufficiency in all things, and even promises an overflow for good works. It provides the strength, the stamina, the ability to serve, to keep going without getting worn out.
That idea of grace as sufficiency and overflow, that leads us right into the final letter, C, confess.
Confess, consecrate, and continue.
Yeah, based on Romans 10.910. This feels like the activation step, turning that internal belief into something external, something active.
And this is where we hit a really core insight from the source material. It talks about a hierarchy of confession.
Hierarchy, okay.
Yeah. It states pretty clearly that confessing your sins is actually the lowest form of confession.
Lowest. Why? Isn't confessing sin important?
Well, from this perspective, the debt's already settled, right? By Christ's grace, back in step B, the sin is covered. So dwelling on your failures isn't the main thing. The higher, more elevating act
Is declaring faith.
Exactly. Declaring your faith. Proclaiming that Jesus was resurrected and asserting his lordship over your life. That outward declaration of his finished work, that's presented as the central requirement for activating salvation's benefits.
So the focus shifts completely forward. Onto the victory, not backward onto my messing up.
That's the idea. And then the message gives these secondary ABCs, which are more about lifestyle application.
Right, taking the theology and living it out.
Exactly. A, acknowledge the Lord, recognize him in everything. This is crucial maybe for younger listeners thinking about studies or careers. It stops you relying only on your own limited talent.
Okay. B, become a light. Reflecting Christ, being that new creature from 2 Corinthians 5.12.
And C, consecrate for life.
Consecrate, meaning
Setting yourself apart. It's about continuing the journey, abiding in his grace, behaving with godliness, learning to say no to ungodliness and worldly desires, like Titus 2 talks about. And crucially, this behavior gets linked back to healing. The source connects continuing in God's goodness to strength and healing. It quotes, "The joy of the Lord is your strength."
So let's bring this all together for the listener. What's the practical takeaway? What is this whole ABC framework aiming to achieve for them?
It seems to target three main outcomes. For believers already, it's a guide for kind of sustained victory, accessing those limitless resources for life, for ministry.
Okay.
For young people, it's principles for success, linking that spiritual confidence to achieving things in studies or work. And maybe most fundamentally, for anyone not yet believing, it offers a clear path to salvation based entirely on that free gift, not on trying to be good enough.
Wow, okay. That was quite a deep dive into this source.
Right.
We started with that key, not in the hand, but in the heart. And we walked through the framework. A, ask for his glory, knowing the resource is limitless. B, believe in his grace, the gift that covers our weakness. And C, confess his resurrection and lordship, which activates everything.
Yeah, and the really powerful implication, I think, is that these resources, whether it's for healing or provision or just spiritual strength, they're presented as available, waiting, as long as the motivation lines up with his glory. It completely shifts the focus from earning these things to simply accepting them through faith.
That idea you mentioned earlier about joy being the source of strength and healing, that's really provocative, isn't it? Here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If this message is right, if God's goodness and the joy he gives are literally the engine for your physical and emotional well-being. What does that imply? What's the revolutionary consequence for how you might approach stress or failure, or even the search for healing in your everyday life?
A very powerful connection to think about, definitely.
You can find a suggested prayer mentioned in the source, and also a link for further connection in the notes for this deep dive. Thanks for learning with us today.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
We'll talk to you next time.